Let down by the NHS, the teenager who died after failings at a psychiatric unit. Neglect contributed to the death of 15-year-old Chris Brennan. His parents say he was abandoned.
It seems that like he was left in a corner and forgotten about. There was no care plan, no risk assessment.
Tonight we have more evidence of the mental health crisis in the NHS.
Pressure on mental health services has never been as great as it is today.
Also on the programme, John Kerry's furious attack on Russia over the aid convoy killings.
I listened to my colleague from Russia and I sort of felt a little bit like there's sort of in a parallel universe here.
Inside Zimbabwe, a special report on the country's failing economy and...
I was shocked when I woke up this morning, no word of a lie.
Showbiz stars react to Brad and Angelina's decision to divorce.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale and James Mates.
Good evening. We start tonight with two reports that give an alarming snapshot of the perilous state of mental health care in England. In the first, a family of a 15-year-old boy who died at a South London psychiatric hospital tell ITV News he was failed in so many ways. Today, a coroner ruled that neglect and a series of blunders had contributed to the death of Chris Brennan.
And following our investigation into the rationing of care by NHS doctors, you've been telling us about huge gaps in mental health support. More on that in a moment. First, Sally Lockwood reports on the failings that led to Chris Brennan's death.
Chris's parents remember him as funny, kind and caring. But at 13, he began hearing voices in his head and started to self-harm, often swallowing objects. By the time he was 15, his parents were struggling to keep him safe at home and admitted him to a psychiatric unit. But he died in the place responsible for protecting his life.
We knew he didn't want to die. He had his plans for the future. He had a lot to look forward to.
You hear all too often about the most vulnerable in society, but surely a child with mental illness, they must be most vulnerable.
Chris began to experience mental illness in 2012 and was involved with local child mental health services. 2 years later, after prolonged periods of self-harm, he was admitted to Bethlem Royal Hospital in South London. Despite being on a ward with around-the-clock care, Chris continued to harm himself and was taken to accident and emergency several times. 6 weeks after being admitted to the hospital, he swallowed the cap of a deodorant bottle and died of cardiac arrest.
The coroner found the number of self-harming incidents on the unit here desensitised staff and that a lack of risk assessment and up-to-date care plan contributed to Christopher's death. The hospital has since apologised to his family and reviewed its procedures, but Christopher is one of at least 11 children to have died on psychiatric units in England in the 4-year period up to and including his death.
Today's ruling that neglect here contributed to Chris's death has made his parents' 2-year fight for answers feel worthwhile. But their hope is his death will protect other vulnerable children.
Society seems to shun mental health. They seem to take a step back.
It seems that like he was left in a corner and forgotten about.
Chris's short life was troubled, but his parents now live with the pain that it shouldn't have ended when it did. Sally Lockwood, ITV News.
Chris Brennan's death highlights the many challenges facing mental health provision in England. Last week, we revealed that almost 3/4 of NHS doctors admitted to rationing all types of healthcare.
Now, many of you contacted us with your concerns, especially about getting access to mental health support. Our health editor, Rachel Younger, spoke to the mother of an autistic boy who says he is missing out on vital treatment.
9-year-old Rishi has a great head for figures.
81 divided by 9 is 9.
Correct. But what doesn't add up is what's happened to his hospital appointments. His autism affects his speech and mobility as much as ever. but his care has been cut to a fraction of what it was.
It started with us having an appointment with a community paediatrician every 3 months. Then it went to every 6 months. Over the span of last 3 years, now it's gone to once a year.
Rishi's mum says she's never had an official explanation from doctors, but doesn't need one.
Where they used to see about 300, 400 children per paediatrician per month, they were allocated that got doubled, and now it's been more than tripled.
But Rishi's mum was just one among many of you who got in touch to say you couldn't get the right care. One mum told us, "We've been told my son needs an Asperger's assessment. He self-harms and is suicidal, but the first available appointment is in December." Another viewer wrote, "After being discharged from a mental health hospital, the support workers either didn't turn up or cancelled appointments because of no staff. I recently took an overdose." And a third woman posted, "I've been forced to go private for an autism assessment. The NHS waiting list is more than 2 years." Every one of your stories adding weight to the findings of the Public Accounts Committee, which after scrutinising the figures can't see how the transformation of mental health care will be funded.
We're already seeing difficult decisions being made about rationing. So there's got to be a bigger national conversation about this, including around mental health treatment, and it's going to be very difficult to afford to deliver what every patient needs.
And those running our hospitals know it.
I have never seen the pressure that I have seen on health services now in the 25 years that I've worked in here. Pressure on mental health services has never been as great as it is today.
The figures and your stories revealing the growing gap between the services we want and the money available.
I mean, it's really worrying stuff, isn't it? What's been the response from the Department of Health?
Well, it points out that NHS England has committed an extra £1 billion a year by 2020 for mental health. It also notes that the Public Accounts Committee says that important progress has been made, for example, with bringing in mental health waiting time targets. But you can see, can't you, just how far there is to go, especially when you put this into the wider NHS context. And that's because it wasn't just people with autism or people with mental health conditions who got in touch with us. It was also those suffering from physical conditions who told us, for example, about cuts to equipment like wheelchairs and hearing aids. And that's really sobering when you consider that despite the big deficits this year, the NHS still needs to save another £3 billion this year.
Sobering indeed, isn't it, Rachel? Thank you very much. And to share more of your experiences and stories about the NHS, you can go to our website, itv.com/news.
US Secretary of State John Kerry has launched a blistering attack on Russia over the bombing of an aid convoy and warned the future of Syria is hanging by a thread.
Face to face with his Russian counterpart at the United Nations, Mr. Kerry accused them of an outrageous 2-hour attack which killed 20 aid workers. He said it had dealt a very heavy blow to any hopes of peace, as Paul Davis reports.
While the superpowers point fingers at each other, it's back to the daily life and death struggle in rebel-held Aleppo. Emergency teams looking for and finding survivors of the latest Syrian government bombing raids in the rubble. The ceasefire seems a distant memory here, though the causes of its breakdown have led to more angry words between the planet's most powerful nations.
I listened to my colleague from Russia, and I sort of felt a little bit like they're sort of in a parallel universe here. How can people go sit at a table with a regime that bombs hospitals and drops chlorine gas again and again and again and again and again and again?
Kerry says Monday's attack on a UN aid convoy raised profound doubts over whether Russia and its Syrian allies would live up to any ceasefire deal. Russia, though, has denied involvement in the attack, producing drone footage that appears to show a militia truck towing a mortar alongside the convoy. Russia's defense ministry has even stated that an American drone capable of carrying out the attack was also in the area. Foreign Minister Lavrov called for a full, impartial inquiry before anyone was blamed. And while those who could possibly stop all this find reasons not to do so, there appears little hope of a permanent end to the bombardment and the human misery it causes. Paul Davis, ITV News.
Police in the US state of North Carolina say they warned an armed black man to drop his gun before shooting him. The death of Keith Lamont Scott sparked violent protests on the streets of Charlotte overnight, leaving 16 officers injured. The unrest came just hours after another demonstration in Oklahoma over to the death of an unarmed black man there after he too was shot by police.
Here there were more signs today that the economy is doing better than predicted following the vote to leave the EU. An influential economic think tank raised the UK's growth forecast for the rest of the year. It had warned of an immediate shock after the Brexit vote. Our business editor Joel Hills is in central London. Joel, is this good news?
Well, it's good news, James, in as much as some of the dire warnings haven't yet come to pass. I say yet, but remember, before June the 23rd, we were told that a vote to leave the European Union would terrify Britain's households and businesses into reining in spending. The economy would grind to a halt, perhaps even start shrinking. House prices would fall, inflation would rise, living standards would be squeezed. Well, nothing of the sort, 2 months on, has yet come to pass. And some of those forecasts now look rather foolish. The OECD today has revised its forecast. It said that next year has been downgraded to 1% growth. However, it has upgraded slightly our prospects for this year. So far, so good. But remember, Brexit is a process. It is not an event, and we are right at the beginning of that process, and the government still hasn't told us what is going to happen next. And the logic still holds, that is this: if we end up leaving the single market along with the European Union, there is every chance that Britain will end up poorer as a result.
Joel, thank you very much indeed.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News, protesters carrying flowers attacked by police in Zimbabwe. A special report.
And the author of War Horse goes into battle over selection in education.
If you like the unity of this country, you're simply dividing people at the age of 11.
Those stories and more after the break. Welcome back. Robert Mugabe railed against Britain and the West today, calling for the United Nations to lift what he called spiteful sanctions against Zimbabwe. They were imposed partly because of human rights abuses under Mugabe's regime. And ITV News has seen first-hand evidence of the abduction and torture of his political opponents. Our Africa correspondent John Ray has been undercover inside Zimbabwe and from there sends this exclusive report.
In Zimbabwe, years of pent-up anger have at last ignited. Protest after protest, the greatest challenge in a decade to the long reign of Robert Mugabe, whose security forces are in turn accused of brutality. Dozens of dissidents, it's claimed, abducted and tortured. The evidence we found lies in a Harare hospital, closely watched by police, yet we reached the bedside of one who survived his ordeal, but only just.
They pointed 2 guns to me, 2 AK-47 guns, and without me saying anything, I surrendered in my hands in the air, and then they did actually put me in a sack, and then took me out of the house. And then when we reached the destination, they just took me outside the car, threw me on the ground, and then they started putting electrical shockers on my feet.
And then the beatings began.
You could have died. Yeah, it's one of those things where actually I started praying the minute that they took me. I thought that was the last time that I was actually going to be seen by people.
We don't need police clearance.
Yet they ignore their president's will to stay in power at their peril. This man's offence, apparently to try to hand flowers to riot police. They responded to his bouquet with batons.
They brutalized me, and left me for dead. I suffered most on my hand because I tried to protect my head.
3 weeks on, the wounds haven't healed, and his fury is rising.
If someone has made many people suffer, and because of that, look, he shouldn't at all be accorded any form of respect.
But the future might not be decided on the streets, but at the banks, where queues show Zimbabwe's run out of money. Their solution, coming soon, is to print banknotes, the first since they abandoned their own currency amid ruinous hyperinflation. At its peak, 100 trillion Zimbabwean dollars bought merely a weekly bus pass, and people had to carry huge wads of this stuff around. But still, it was worthless because the shops were empty. Now, this is a nightmare that many here fear is soon to return. The plan has triggered yet more angry demonstrations, and for ordinary Zimbabweans, despair.
This time around, the problems would be you would have the cash, the house full of cash, but no foodstuffs in the shops.
Some now dare to believe change is coming, but not without a fight and not without cost. John Ray, ITV News, Zimbabwe.
Here, an award-winning children's author has told ITV News that plans to increase selection in England's schools will further divide society. The writer of Warhorse, Michael Morpurgo, says children are over-tested and that when he failed the 11+, it made him feel worthless. Nina Nanau reports.
Early one morning, Jim woke up and saw an enormous plant growing outside his window.
Class 1D is gripped, simply listening and enjoying the story. But that love of books and learning is being destroyed in later years, says a former children's laureate. Michael Morpurgo says over-testing is to blame, putting young children under too much pressure and creating a sense of failure that as a young boy he experienced.
Well, I took the 11+ and I failed it. And everyone knows you failed it. You don't hide these things, you know. All the people around you, the teachers, the other children, all know you failed. And the word fail hits you like a dagger in your heart when you're that age. So you don't forget it. And I think what it does is it somehow sends you into a spiral that you simply can't get out of. The notion is that they have thought you to be stupid.
So selective education, grammar schools, for you, clearly not the way forward?
We've done it, it didn't work, and the Prime Minister shouldn't be doing it. You're doing a terrible thing to, if you like, the unity of this country. You're simply dividing people at the age of 11.
The government has announced plans to increase the number of grammar schools in England. And while the system of selecting pupils who pass the 11+ has long proved controversial, testing primary school children does have some merit, says this deputy head teacher.
It's really important, it's in fact crucial that children know at age 11 where they are, and I'd much rather that they failed in year 7 than in year 13, so that when they leave school they don't have qualifications.
Get 'em, said the giant fiercely. Can I hear that?
Get 'em! These 7-year-olds for now are just happy to be read to. The challenges of formal tests and exams yet to come. Nina Nana, ITV News in southwest London.
Digging will begin on the Greek island of Kos next week as part of the search for missing toddler Ben Needham. It follows new claims he died after being hit by a digger. The 21-month-old was last seen in July 1991.
And EasyJet will hold talks with the pilots' union BALPA tomorrow in an attempt to resolve a dispute over fatigue. Earlier today, pilots voted overwhelmingly in favour of industrial action.
And finally tonight, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie's split appears to have caught everyone by surprise, even their friend George Clooney. He was struck for words when an interviewer broke the news to him late last night.
And many other showbiz stars have been giving their reaction, as Nazanin Moshiri reports.
Angelina are broken up.
It's a story everyone is talking about. Adele called it an end of an era, dedicating her Madison Square Garden show to the couple.
Really sad for all of you, genuinely. I don't know them at all, but I was shocked when I woke up this morning, no word of a lie.
Okay, the guard by the main elevator shaft.
George Clooney was also surprised by the news. He's got to know Brad Pitt as his partner in crime in the Ocean series.
I didn't know that. Wow.
She filed.
Well, I feel very sorry then. And that's a sad story and unfortunate for a family. It's an unfortunate story about a family. I feel very sorry to hear that. That's the first I've heard of it.
Bombshell breakup. Hollywood reacts to that surprising news.
While the showbiz world digests the news, the headlines are full of rumours. Was there an affair? Was there a clash over parenting?
They would tell people that one of them was very strict and the other one was very soft. Parenting, it's safe to say, a pretty intense negotiation at times.
At Madame Tussauds, the couple separated in wax as well as in life. Despite the hype over the breakup, their fans and Hollywood still love them. These stars will continue to shine in their own right. Nazanin Mashiri, ITV News.
And that's all for now. Reggie Omar's here with News at 10.
But from all of the team here, have a very good evening.
Bye-bye.